of understanding. That memo was signed just 10 days ago. U.S. Central Command said its strikes hit hard Iran's military infrastructure, air defense sites, drone storage facilities. The U.S. military says it was in response to what it called an Iranian attack on a commercial ship in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran retaliated for those 10 U.S. strikes by launching missiles and drones against U.S. facilities in Bahrain and Kuwait, and Bahrain's government shared these images of the damage to a residential building in that Iranian attack. CNN's Paula Hancock has more. Good morning.
Hello, Victor. Well, it was a sleepless night for many residents in both Bahrain and Kuwait, as once again they found themselves bearing the brunt of the Iranian retaliation. We heard in Bahrain that there was damage to a residential building. No deaths were reported, though. But what we are seeing is this the tit-for-tat strikes, really the most serious escalation we have seen since that MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, was signed. And we are also seeing both sides, both the US and Iran, accusing the other of violating that memorandum. Now, the key issue at this point is the Strait of Hormuz, I should say, one of the key issues. But this is what has sparked the most recent escalation. We have heard from a Revolutionary Guard spokesperson saying that there's a violation, what the US has done, also saying it will result in the complete halt of all diplomatic processes, suggesting that they may not go back to the talks. But what we have seen certainly is that that vessels in the Strait of Hormuz have, for the most part, been taking the southern route closer to the Omani coast, and Iran says they have to go in the Iranian route, which means they have full control of who comes through. And this is what we heard from Abbas Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister, who just gave a press conference a couple of hours ago in Baghdad, saying that the number of vessels could be back to pre-war levels in 30 days, but Iran has to have exclusive control over the Strait of Hormuz. Now, clearly, that is not something the US or the Gulf nations, frankly, will be agreeing to. Let's listen to more from what we heard of a Revolutionary Guard spokesperson earlier.
خب طبیعت دشمن ما همینطور هست. دشمن عهد شکنه، دشمن غیر قابل اعتماده و در هر زمانی ممکنه یه تحرکاتی داشته باشه و این تحرکات هم برای این دشمن ما طبیعی میدونیم چون ذات دشمن رو در واقع میشناسیم.
US Central Command saying that Iran had the opportunity to respect this ceasefire. It chose not to, but the commercial vessels are still trying to transit the Strait of Hormuz. And we do see that as well from data from marine traffic, for example. We do see a number of ships trying to get through the Strait of Hormuz. But of course, it is a lot more tenuous with those threats coming from Iran. We heard that the security status level is substantial, according to the UK Maritime Agency, in the Straits at this point. The UN evacuation of seafarers stuck there since the end of February has also been halted.
Nice to see you on this Sunday. The news overnight over Iran, so I want to talk about that first, because we had this fragile ceasefire. We had this memorandum of understanding. We advanced last week in Switzerland talking very positively about how things were going. And we've seen this escalating tension and strikes over the last several days. Just to remind viewers, this all has to do with what's going around in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran attacking a ship near the Strait of Hormuz. Then the U.S. conducted a round of strikes on Friday. Then yesterday, a back and forth between Iran, the U.S. going after military targets in Iran, Iran responding to Gulf states, attacking Gulf states where there were U.S. assets in those states. Tamara, you cover the White House. What are you hearing about whether this ceasefire can actually hold or whether we're going to see all-out war again?
Well, the president frequently puts threats on social media. He doesn't always follow through on them. Clearly, this White House wants this war to be settled. The way the president talks about oil prices coming down, which they have, indicates exactly where he wants this to be, which is stable. The problem is the president's wishes aren't actually commands when it comes to Iran. And Iran is saying that actually, this MOU says they control the Strait of Hormuz and whether ships transit through, which is not the U.S. understanding of that MOU.
Yeah, and Iran is saying that these diplomatic processes may not go forward now in light of these strikes. They're accusing the United States of violating this MOU. But the challenge is, it was so vague what was in that MOU. They're arguing the details aren't clear, and as a result, we're seeing both sides disagree about what it actually means, and it's leading to potentially more violence. It is leading to more violence, but potentially war once again.
Yeah, the MOU is not going to provide the finality that the president was hoping for at the end of the war. I think what is going on is this escalation is showing that making peace with Iran is going to be almost as painful as being at war with Iran for the president politically. Iran is trying to show that it has this new leverage over the Strait of Hormuz, that it intends to exit this process, controlling the strait, controlling the traffic, and using it to create revenue for its economy. And it's trying to stress that to the United States before the next round of negotiations. The only good thing about this, I think, is that often Middle East ceasefires don't stop the shooting, but they do stop a further round of escalation. There's enough reason to think that it's in the national interests of both parties, the US and Iran, not to go back to full-scale war. The president has already told us he's not prepared to create a Great Depression, in his words, by going on with the war, and Iran knows that, so it knows it can push him. So there are reasons to hope that this doesn't get a lot worse, but going into the midterms, I think we might see Iran using this leverage over and over again.
Iran knows the political pressure the president is under. Of course, the president said this is going to be over within a matter of a handful of weeks, and this could persist and get much worse. All right, we'll obviously continue to monitor that.
We are getting first reports from the ground after apparent new Iranian strikes on U.S. military facilities. Earlier, Iran said it had launched attacks on facilities in Kuwait and Bahrain. A U.S. official is telling Reuters there are no casualties or major damage at U.S. installations. Kuwait says its air defenses have been intercepting incoming fire, while Bahrain says its emergency sirens are activated and people should head to safe places. That is all happening after the US carried out its second wave of strikes on Iranian military targets in as many days. US Central Command called it a response to an Iranian attack on a civilian vessel on Saturday morning. The fighting was reignited after a similar Iranian strike on another cargo ship earlier in the week. CNN's Paula Hancock is in the region, monitoring those developments for us from Abu Dhabi. It's good to see you, Paula. Can you just bring us up to speed on the latest, please?
Well, it was certainly a sleepless night in Kuwait and Bahrain as we saw that Kuwait was intercepting projectiles from Iran. Also in Bahrain, at least on 2 occasions, there were emergency alerts, 2 in the morning, 5 in the morning, as incoming was detected. Now, we heard from Tehran, the Revolutionary Guard, through state media, saying that this was a retaliatory attack, that they were targeting US military targets in the region, and this was because the US had been targeting Iranian targets earlier on Saturday. Now, we are seeing this escalation in these tit-for-tat strikes on both sides. We have heard from the foreign ministry in Iran. They have said that they believe what the US is doing in targeting in targeting Iran, is that they are violating the memorandum of understanding that has been signed between 2 sides, saying that the US regime places no value on its commitments. Breaking promises is part of its nature. But we have heard, though, that the IRGC says that they targeted 8 military installations. A US official telling Reuters at this point there's no indication there has been any damage to any US facilities or any US casualties. We'll keep an eye on that. This all stems from the Strait of Hormuz and the Revolutionary Guard believing that it is in complete control of the Strait of Hormuz, saying that traffic in the strait falls under Iran's responsibility, saying vessels trying to take other routes not controlled by Iran will be dealt with more firmly than before. We have been seeing vessels try to stick to the southern part of the Strait of Hormuz, so hugging the Omani coast, as the Iranians are trying to control the northern part. Now, we have heard from the US president as well. He has posted on social media. I'll read you part of it. Quote, "There may come a point when we are no longer able to be reasonable and will be forced to militarily complete the job that we very successfully started," pointing out that if that happens, the Islamic Republic of Iran will no longer exist. Now, we have heard these threats many times in the past, and in fact, we've heard the chief negotiator of Iran, for example, saying that it points to desperation from the United States. So threats are not working on Iran at this point. And what we are seeing is this escalation between both sides. We understand from Central Command, though, they believe that commercial vessels are still trying to transit the Strait of Hormuz. It's unclear exactly how many are trying to make that what is becoming a fairly dangerous trip at this point. We heard from the UK Maritime Agency that they say the threat security level at this point is substantial. Ben?
And at the same time as that, Lebanon is accusing Israel of conducting a deadly strike just a day after signing a framework ceasefire agreement. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so we've heard from the Israeli military. They say that they have killed a Hezbollah militants in Nabatea area. This is in southern Lebanon. We understand that this has happened, as you say, just a day after they have been talking about this ceasefire agreement, which was agreed last week with the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, calling it the beginning of the beginning. This was between the U.S., Israel, and Lebanon, and of course, it's notable to point out it does not include Hezbollah, the Iran-backed militia group, which has rejected the talks between Israel and Lebanon and has rejected this ceasefire agreement. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did say that Israeli military is pulling out of two areas that it currently occupies in southern Lebanon, saying that he believed that this agreement was a tremendous achievement which forces Iran out of the picture, saying they're breaking the Iranian axis of resistance. But of course, this additional strikes that we are seeing and that Israel has now confirmed is putting that ceasefire as well in jeopardy. Ben?
Okay, Paula, thanks very much. For more, we are joined by retired Vice Admiral Robert Harwood, a former Deputy Commander of U.S. Central Command. He's now a Fellow at the Jewish Institute for the National Security of America, and he's in San Diego. It is good to see you, sir. Thanks for being here. What is your assessment of where this conflict stands tonight? Has the ceasefire survived in any meaningful sense? Are we just watching it collapse?
I think you're watching it collapse, if there ever really was one, as both sides continue to act. And more importantly, I think this indicates how important the surrogates are to Iran. When Lebanon and Israel reached an agreement in Lebanon, which justified the irrelevance of Hezbollah, both to the Lebanese government and in support of Israel, Iran had to act. I think that's what these strikes were about. So it illustrated, again, how fragile all the negotiations are. And the path to really Iran is capitulation, not negotiations, because they're not going to give up on any of the components of their policies and programs they've had under this regime. And that's clear, from the nuclear program to funding their surrogates, the missiles and the drones. They're going to keep and maintain all of them and leverage as much time to try to get through President Trump and ensure the political will of the United States fades into the sunrise. And President Trump's not going to let that happen. As you see, he's willing to act if they can achieve those objectives.
Iran says it's launched strikes against U.S. military sites in Kuwait and Bahrain. In military terms, is this still within the bounds of what could be considered a fragile ceasefire, or has Iran crossed the line?
I think that and the attack on the commercial ships have crossed the line in every way possible, and it's their standard operating procedure. They take these actions to try to enhance their position on the negotiation table and to draw out as much time as possible. And I assume and hope the administration will not only continue the military actions, but follow up again with the financial actions, put the blockade back in place and financially strangle Iran. With both of those components, I think there's their better route to capitulation on both the nuclear issue and the Straits of Hormuz. So I think that may end up being the better strategy for this administration.
Well, speaking about that strategy, what do these latest attacks tell you about Iran's military capabilities? Because after everything we've seen over the past several days, how much ability does Tehran still have to project force?
I think it's still limited, but they want to illustrate that they have it, and that's for internal as much as external messaging. So they still have drones, they still have missiles, I believe very few, and in this case, very tactical, didn't do any real damage. But until that's really completely eradicated, they're going to present as threats. And that's why the military response into these actions is so appropriate and should be consistent, tied together with the financial components. You add both of those together and you bring the regime to its knees and force them to capitulate.
Is that there are new U.S. strikes on Iran that we are following. This comes on the tail end of what has been back and forth strikes over the past few days. U.S. Central Command says it carried out additional attacks in response to what it's calling, quote, continued Iranian aggression against commercial shipping. Now, these new strikes come after an Iranian attack Thursday against a commercial vessel near the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. then launched strikes against Iran around the area yesterday. Now, all of this as the U.S. and Iran look to negotiate a nuclear deal. CNN's Julia Benbrook joins us now from the White House. We are still amid the negotiations around the Memorandum of Understanding, but obviously some kinetic action back and forth. What is the latest we're hearing from the administration?
On this latest back and forth near the Strait of Hormuz, U.S. Central Command says that it has carried out additional strikes against multiple targets. And that came in response to Iran, as it said that it had launched strikes against U.S. targets just hours earlier. I want to pull up this recent statement for you now. In it, they said CENTCOM forces launched strikes today in direct response to continued Iranian aggression against commercial shipping. U.S. military aircraft targeted Iranian military surveillance infrastructure, communication systems, air defense sites, drone storage facilities, and mine layer capabilities. Adding commercial vessel transits through the Strait of Hormuz continue, and that U.S. forces remain vigilant, lethal, and ready. Now, it was just a week ago now that Vice President J.D. Vance, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, just last weekend, they traveled to Switzerland to really kick off the technical talks after the United States and Iran had agreed to the Memorandum of Understanding. A reminder that that Memorandum of Understanding is really just a starting point because it kicked off this 60-day time period to work through the details on the big issues like Iran's nuclear program and the fate of its stockpile of highly enriched uranium. As this back and forth started over the last couple of days now, Vance took to social media and he wrote this. He said, Iran signed a ceasefire agreement. We have honored it. If they have disagreements about how the MOU is being applied, they can pick up the phone, but violence will be met with violence. So the U.S. military conducted strikes on Friday. Those were in response to Tehran targeting a commercial vessel in the Strait of Hormuz. So the escalation has continued over the last 36 hours or so. And all of this puts some strain on these already fragile negotiations that are taking place.
Yeah. Julia Benbrook, really appreciate the reporting. I want to keep the conversation going by bringing in Republican Congressman Byron Donalds of Florida. He serves on the House Oversight and Financial Services Committee. He's also running for governor in Florida and has been endorsed by President Trump. Congressman, thank you for taking the time tonight. I just want to start with Iran because, look, it's not clear how these new strikes could impact the Memorandum of Understanding just yet. But on the policy side of it itself, as we understand, it doesn't make any mention of Iran's ballistic missile program, which has been criticized by some of your colleagues. And I just wonder, does that need to be part of any final agreement? Would you support the deal if that wasn't addressed?
Well, first of all, it's good to be with you. I think if you're going to talk about the ballistic missile program in particular, this is where the president and his team that's trying to negotiate an agreement that's going to work going forward need to have some flexibility in how they're going to do that. The ballistic missile program causes me a lot of concerns, a lot of people a lot of concerns, especially now knowing that it's far more advanced.
President Trump posting about the latest U.S. attacks on Iran. I want to bring in CNN's Julia Benbrook, who joins us now from the White House. So, Julia, what did President Trump say here?
Well, the big questions have been, how will this recent back and forth impact the ceasefire, and how will it impact the ongoing negotiations with Iran? And this post from President Donald Trump that came just moments ago really only highlights that uncertainty. I want to pull this up for you now. In it, he said, quote, United States aircraft just struck Iranian missile and drone storage locations and coastal radar sites for violating the ceasefire agreement again. And then he adds in strong language, it is very possible they will never learn. There may come a point when we are no longer able to be reasonable and will be forced to militarily complete the job that we very successfully started. If that happens, the Islamic Republic of Iran will no longer exist. This coming just about a week after Vice President J.D. Vance led a delegation to Switzerland for these high-level talks as they worked toward a long-term agreement. That memorandum of understanding really just a starting point. It kicked off this 60-day time frame, but these talks took place at a high level, and he left optimistic, saying that he thought that a lot of great progress had been made. We saw the Iranian strikes on a commercial vessel on Thursday. The U.S. responded to those. Just hours ago, there were reports of Iranian strikes at U.S. targets, and the U.S. responded there with U.S. Central Command saying that it had carried out additional strikes at the direction of the president at multiple targets. Omar?
All right, Julia Benbrook, really appreciate the reporting. I want to keep this conversation going, get some analysis with CNN political and national security analyst David Sanger. He's also a correspondent for the New York Times. So, David, what do you read into President Trump's response here?
Well, at one level, Omar, we're kind of back to where we were 2 months ago. Remember when he was threatening to destroy the Iranian civilization?
President Trump warning Iran against violating the current ceasefire agreement. Trump saying, quote, there may come a point when we are no longer able to be reasonable and will be forced to militarily complete the job that we very successfully started. If that happens, the Islamic Republic of Iran will no longer exist. Those are his words there, the president's. Tonight, U.S. Central Command said it had carried out additional attacks on Iran in response to what it called continued Iranian aggression against commercial shipping. I want to bring in CNN senior political analyst and Bloomberg opinion columnist Ron Brownstein. So, Ron, let's just talk about the politics of this. Can President Trump afford for this conflict to escalate politically? And if not, why?
Well, look, I think his reluctance to have the conflict persist explains why we were willing to accept a ceasefire that advanced so few of our goals and had so many financial concessions to Iran. I mean, I think they understand that the president feels tremendous political pressure to put the war behind him, to have gas prices begin to decline, and to get the lift from that Republicans would benefit from heading into the midterm election. So I think he will be very reluctant to get back into a situation of full-scale conflict anytime between now and November.
You know, we've started to see gas prices go down from the spike that came as this war broke out really a few months ago. If this does move away from diplomacy again, how do Republicans deal with that dynamic ahead of the midterms?
Yeah, there's really no way. I mean, there's no way you can, the problem, as Joe Biden discovered, we're talking about the 2-year anniversary of his debate with Trump, there is just no way to message people's cost of living. And, this isn't, we're not telling them how the war is going in Ukraine or even in Iran. I mean, it's something they are living through every day. And if people are going to the pump, and, there are a lot of Republican voters who drive big trucks and, swing voters who drive big SUVs. I mean, when they are coming home home with $100 bill from the pump, I mean, there's really almost nothing you can say.
This hour, U.S. Central Command says the United States is conducting new additional strikes on Iranian targets around the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. and Iran have been trading back and forth attacks at the waterway, critical for the world's oil supply, testing their fragile peace agreement over the past few days. And all of this as the 60-day clock continues to tick down for the U.S. and Iran to reach a final nuclear deal, feels even further at the moment. But CNN correspondent Julia Benbrook joins us now from the White House. And Julia, what are we hearing from the administration, especially on these latest strikes?
Further escalation here in the Middle East, and U.S. Central Command says that at the direction of President Donald Trump, it has launched additional strikes at multiple targets. That comes in response to the Iranian drone strikes that were reported just hours earlier. I do want to pull up this statement. This provides a bit more information. CENTCOM said that forces launched strikes today in direct response to continued Iranian aggression against commercial shipping. U.S. military aircraft targeted Iranian military surveillance infrastructure, communication systems, air defense sites, drone storage facilities, and mine layer capabilities, adding that commercial vessel transits through the Strait of Hormuz continue and that U.S. forces remain vigilant, lethal, and ready. Now, it was just a week ago, just last weekend, that Vice President J.D. Vance, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner were all there in Switzerland to really kick off these technical talks. The Memorandum of Understanding, which has been signed, really just a starting point. It kicks off the 60-day time frame to talk through some of the bigger issues, like Iran's nuclear program and its fate of its stockpile of highly enriched uranium. But Vance, he's really been at the forefront of all of this, and he put out a post yesterday after kind of the first back and forth here. Now things have escalated further, but in it he said Iran signed a ceasefire agreement. We have honored it. If they have disagreements about how the MOU is being applied, they can pick up the phone, but violence will be met with violence. So we know the U.S. military conducted strikes on Friday. That was in response to Tehran targeting a commercial vessel in the Strait of Hormuz. President Donald Trump was asked about this. This was yesterday afternoon before the U.S. responded for the first time. Take a listen to what he had to say.
You said that Iran violated the ceasefire. Will they face any consequences?
You'll find out.
Do you consider the ceasefire to still be in place?
I don't like the fact that they took a shot yesterday, actually 4, we knocked down 3, at a ship.
To Iran,
respond, you're going to find out.
And now making it clear that he did not like that those shots were taken this morning either. So this continues to escalate that tension there in the Strait of Hormuz, threatening to put a strain on these ongoing negotiations, which have already been in a bit of a fragile place. Omar?
Yeah, that's just the latest in the back and forth we've seen over the past few days. Julia Benbrook, really appreciate the reporting from the White House. I want to bring in former Congressman and retired Air National Guard Lieutenant Colonel Adam Kinzinger. And look, you've flown surveillance planes for the United States in many places around the world. And I just wonder, do you see these latest back and forth attacks as a violation of the current ceasefire between the United States and Iran, or just more posturing?
Well, I mean, it's clearly a violation of the ceasefire because there's firing going on. The interesting point here is, first off, I think the president is right to respond. And I think we have to respond very aggressively. But there were a couple of mistakes made leading up to this. First off, during the last month or so, while Iran was keeping the Strait closed, we had halted all attacks. And if you're going to negotiate, you negotiate from a position of strength. That's one thing. The other thing is, both in you talking about where the strikes were today and the strikes yesterday, they're hitting communications, radar, missile sites, drone production, command and control, air defense sites, all which we were supposed to have already destroyed. So either we didn't already destroy it, or they have already rebuilt that capacity in a very short amount of time. So I think we need to be very straight and clear about what capacity Iran still has. But yes, the president was right to respond to this violation, and clearly it is a violation.
You know, for the president, it is an interesting position because, to your point, The United States, as Vice President Vance also said, violence will be met with violence. If there's one set of strikes, the United States will respond. There's also a power dynamic in the negotiations as well. There's also the politics outside of it, where President Trump has clearly wanted to get to some sort of resolution in this war. And yet, again, you're in that dynamic where you have to respond if you're struck. I wonder how you see the risk of putting Republicans in a tougher spot here for the president, while also weighing the national security interests of the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, it's putting Republicans in a tough spot. The problem is that you and I and everybody watching knows that the president is desperate for a deal. That means Iran knows the president is desperate for a deal. And when Iran knows that the president is desperate for a deal, they're going to hold out. They're going to violate the ceasefire. They're going to do everything they can to extract everything from the United States.
Tonight, U.S. forces have conducted new strikes on Iranian targets. Central Command says this was in response to an Iranian attack on an oil tanker in the Strait of Hormuz. Let's analyze this a little bit with Gary Seymour. He served as President Obama's White House coordinator for arms control and weapons of mass destruction, and is now director of the Crown Center for Middle East Studies at Brandeis University. I just want to start with the breaking news tonight. How are you looking at these new strikes and the recent strikes around the Strait of Hormuz over the last 48 hours?
So I think it was inevitable, because the U.S. and Iran have fundamentally different views about the future of the Strait. The U.S. wants things to go back to how they were before the war, where there was free passage through the Strait. Iran wants to use the war in order to establish its control over the Strait.
Getting initial reactions from Tehran after the latest round of U.S. strikes on Iran. On Friday, the U.S. Central Command said it struck a series of Iranian military targets. This is after an apparent Iranian drone attack on a ship. That could be a major test for the U.S.-Iran interim agreement, which was signed only 10 days ago. In response, a top Iranian lawmaker slammed the U.S., saying the attack came in the middle of negotiations again. Meanwhile, diplomats say Israel and Lebanon have just made their first step towards a potential future peace deal. They signed an agreement with the U.S. on Friday. Israel says its forces will pull out of 2 areas in southern Lebanon, which will be handed over to the Lebanese military. For more on all of this, we're joined by Paula Hancock. She's monitoring these developments for us from Abu Dhabi. Good morning to you, Paula. Let's begin with those U.S. strikes that took place after an apparent drone attack on the Strait of Hormuz by Iran. Were these U.S. strikes limited in scope? Are they over? What were they targeting? Can we expect more? Tell us the latest here.
Well, Salma, what we know is from Central Command, they say that they carried out military targets, strikes against radar sites along the Strait of Hormuz, also military and missile and drone locations. Now, it appears to be a single operation, according to Central Command, a U.S. official saying that they don't believe that this is a return to hostilities. But what we've since heard from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Tehran is that they condemn these strikes. They have said that it is in violation of that memorandum of understanding that's been signed between the US and Iran, and also saying that the Revolutionary Guard authorized carrying out its own defensive strikes against US military targets in the region. Central Command has not confirmed whether anything has been hit or whether that did in fact take place. So of course the question now is this an isolated event? Have both sides carried out their strikes, and will they now go back to the negotiations? It all started, of course, on Thursday when there was this strike against a vessel, which the US said was caused by an Iranian drone. Iran has not claimed responsibility, but we have heard from the Revolutionary Guard, from Iranian officials, that they want to make sure that these vessels that are transiting this crucial waterway are using the Iranian route. So they still require Iranian permits and permission effectively. Many of them are taking the more southern route through these waters, hugging the Omani coast. Now, we've heard a response as well from the US Vice President, J.D. Vance. I'll read you what he has posted, saying, quote, Iran signed a ceasefire agreement. We have honored it. If they have disagreements about how the MOU is being applied, they can pick up the phone, but violence will be met with violence. We also heard from President Trump saying that what happened on Thursday was a, quote, foolish violation. Now, at this point, we really are waiting to see whether or not, as I say, this is isolated. There doesn't appear to be an appetite on either side to resume full-blown military strikes. But of course, the coming hours will be key. Salma?
But it's not just this exchange of fire in the Strait of Hormuz that's threatening the agreement here. There is also the conflict in Lebanon. And I know there are diplomatic efforts underway this week to resolve that. Is there any progress there, Paula?
So what we have seen is that there has been a trilateral agreement between the US, Israel and Lebanon. Now, of course, the key here is that Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed militia, is not part of it. Hezbollah has rejected these talks and has rejected the agreement that has resulted from these negotiations in Washington. But what we have seen is that there has been an agreement reached that there will be 2 areas in southern Lebanon, one just north of the Litani River, one south, that the Israeli forces will withdraw from. Now, we've heard that they will be implementing this sort of pilot program where the Israeli forces hand it over to the Lebanese military in the hope that Hezbollah does not return to those areas. Now, we have heard from the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. Here is how he is highlighting what has been agreed.
The most important thing is that, first of all, Israel remains in security zone in southern Lebanon. This is a great achievement, and we are maintaining it as long as Hezbollah does not disarm, as long as there is danger to the state of Israel. This is also a great blow to Iran.
Israel also saying they will temporarily withdraw some of its forces. Secretary of State Marco Rubio calling this the beginning of the beginning. Salma.
We're getting initial reactions from Tehran after the latest round of U.S. strikes on Iran. On Friday, the U.S. Central Command said it struck a series of Iranian military targets after an apparent Iranian drone attack on a ship. That could be a major test for the U.S.-Iran interim agreement that was signed only 10 days ago. In response, a top Iranian lawmaker slammed the U.S., saying the attack came right in the middle of negotiations again. President Donald Trump called the Iranian attack foolish, but said on Friday that Tehran still has some military muscle.
We still have a fight. They have some capability, not much. They're not winning or anything, but they have some capability. They can still shoot.
Meanwhile, diplomats say Israel and Lebanon have just made their first steps towards a potential future peace deal. They signed an agreement with the U.S. on Friday. Israel says its forces will pull out of 2 areas in southern Lebanon, which will be handed over to the Lebanese military. Our Paula Hancock is monitoring all of these developments, and she joins us now live from Abu Dhabi. Let's start, of course, with that exchange of fire in the Strait of Hormuz, Paula. Has the deal fallen apart here? Are we looking at a resumption of full-scale military operations by the U.S. and Iran?
Well, Salma, what we heard after the Central Command confirmed that they had carried out these strikes was from a US official saying that it does not reflect a return to major combat operations, at least for now. So there is a chance that this was an isolated incident. It was in reaction to what the US said was an Iranian drone that had hit a vessel transiting the Strait of Hormuz. Now, we have also heard from Central Command that what they were targeting was specifically military targets, so missile and drone stocks and also some coastal radar sites. We heard as well from Tehran, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, saying that they condemned what the US had done, that this was a violation of the Memorandum of Understanding, and that they had, through the Revolutionary Guard, ordered defensive strikes against US military targets in this region. We haven't had confirmation from Central Command whether or not that actually happened or whether there was any damage. So there is a chance this could have been an isolated flare-up. Certainly what we have seen in the Strait of Hormuz, that there had been an increasing number of vessels that were transiting the crucial waterway earlier in the week. On Wednesday, there were more than 70 vessels. Thursday, more than 50. But then, of course, later Thursday, this vessel was struck. Now, we've heard as well from the US Vice President, J.D. Vance. He has posted on social media, and I'll quote, "Iran signed a ceasefire agreement. We have honored it. If they have disagreements about how the MOU is being applied, they can pick up the phone, but violence will be met with violence." The US President as well calling the decision to strike this vessel, which Iran has not claimed responsibility for, a quote, foolish violation. So it is the first time that we've seen this kind of flare up since the Memorandum of Understanding has been signed. There's no clear indication that either side, though, has the appetite at this point, Salma, to really push back into significant military operations.
So for now, the diplomacy continues between Iran and the U.S., but there's also been this parallel track of negotiations taking place in D.C. this week between Israel and Lebanon. Are there any substantive results there?
So the three sides have come to a trilateral agreement. This is Israel, Lebanon, and the United States, which has been mediating these talks. It comes after 4 days of talks in Washington this week. Now, crucially, it doesn't include Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed militia group, which has been fighting against Israel for many years now. Hezbollah has rejected the talks and has also rejected this agreement that has been signed. We have heard from the Israeli Prime Minister as well, talking about the deal. It would include the Israeli military pulling out of two areas that it currently occupies in southern Lebanon, one just north of the Litani River, one south. This is what Prime Minister Netanyahu had to say about the agreement.
The most important thing is that, first of all, Israel remains in security zone in southern Lebanon. This is a great achievement, and we are maintaining it as long as Hezbollah does not disarm, as long as there is danger to the state of Israel. This is also a great blow to Iran.
The Israeli military also said earlier that they will temporarily withdraw some of their troops from southern Lebanon, also from parts of Gaza as well. Now, the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who's been very involved in mediating these talks, was very positive about this agreement, saying it's the beginning of the beginning, but also very realistic as to how difficult the process going forward is. The territory that the Israeli military will pull back from will be given to the Lebanese military. This is part of the pilot program to try and give territory back to the Lebanese state in the hope that Hezbollah does not move back in and take over these areas in southern Lebanon.
After the U.S. and Iran traded attacks this week, there are some serious questions about the sustainability of the ceasefire. CENTCOM announced Friday that it struck Iranian targets and posted this video. Iran state media says it retaliated too, but the U.S. military is not confirming that. CNN's Kristen Holmes explains how the Trump administration is responding.
Vice President J.D. Vance, who has been the face of the negotiations of the deal with Iran, is now the face of this retaliation that we're seeing from the U.S. after Iran launched its attacks on that commercial vessel in the Strait of Hormuz. He posted this on Twitter saying, "Iran signed a ceasefire agreement. We have honored it. If they have a disagreements about how the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, is being applied, they can pick up the phone, but violence will be met with violence." And likely what he is referring to is that before Iran had actually attacked that commercial vessel, they had warned that any commercial vessels could only travel the routes in the Strait of Hormuz that Tehran had dictated. But it's unclear if that's actually part of the Memorandum of Understanding. However, it seems from this tweet that he is referring to the fact that Tehran believes it can dictate the routes on the Strait of Hormuz. Now, from Central Command, we heard that they believed that Iran had violated the ceasefire. However, it seems as though they are acting in a fashion that the ceasefire is still holding despite the violation, despite the retaliation from the United States. They said that they are going to continue to have a military presence in the Strait of Hormuz and in the area in order to ensure that Iran continues to comply with the deal, meaning the deal seems to still be in place. Now, President Trump seemed to be growing frustrated earlier today when he was asked repeatedly if Iran had violated the ceasefire and if the U.S. was going to respond. Take a listen.
I don't like the fact that they took a shot yesterday, actually 4, we knocked down 3, at a ship. Not an allied ship, but a ship, a very expensive ship. And it was fine, but it took a little beating. They shouldn't be doing that, so you'll find out.
Will the U.S.
You'll find out.
Will the U.S. respond? What is your message to Iran?
Respond, you're going to find out.
Sir, why do you think they did that if the talks, you've said repeatedly they're going well? What do you think the motivation is for Iran in attacking a ship?
They're a little bit different. That's why I think of it, 47 years, no president did what we're doing. So you just asked a question, you'll find out. Okay, I think we had enough.
Now, after just a short burst of questions on Iran, President Trump ushered those reporters out of the room. Very uncharacteristic. He's somebody who likes to take questions, usually for a lengthy period of time. And just moments after that exchange, we heard reports from Iranian state media that there were sounds of explosions in southern Iran. Obviously, that response had already been in place and had already taken place. Now, of course, we hear from Central Command that they believe that the ceasefire is still holding, but there are still a lot of questions about what this means for the negotiations, what this means for the deal moving forward. We have been hearing from administration officials just how fragile and just how tenuous these negotiations were. Still unclear what these latest strikes are going to do for those tenuous negotiations. Kristen Holmes, CNN, the White House.
Live look at the traffic on the Strait of Hormuz right now, just hours after the U.S. military conducted strikes on Iran. The Joint Maritime Information Center raised the threat level in the Strait to substantial. CENTCOM shared video of the attack last night, a retaliation after Iran struck a commercial ship in the Strait on Thursday. A U.S. official tells CNN Friday's strike do not indicate a return to major combat operations. Now, Iranian state media says Tehran did retaliate by also targeting the U.S. military in the area, but the U.S. military has not confirmed that. With me now from Abu Dhabi is CNN's Paula Hancock. Paula, how could this affect the MOU?
Well, Victor, it's certainly shaken confidence in the Strait of Hormuz. The fact the US president said that this crucial waterway was free and open has now been brought into doubt as we see this tit for tat from both the US and the Iranian side. Now, we know from Central Command that they have targeted military targets, so radar sites along the Strait of Hormuz, missile and drone stockpiles, they say, and we hear from the Foreign Ministry in Tehran that they have struck US military targets in response. Bahrain has come out and said they were the ones targeted. This, of course, is where the US Navy Fifth Fleet is based. Bahrain condemning the retaliation by Iran. At this point, we have not heard of further retaliatory strikes on either side. It'll be clear in the next few hours or so whether or not there is an appetite to head back to full military operations. We're certainly hearing from a US official that that is not the case on the US side. We've heard from J.D. Vance as well, the US Vice President. I want to read you part of his statement where he says, quote, Iran signed a ceasefire agreement. We have honored it. If they have disagreements about how the MOU is being applied, they can pick up the phone. But violence will be met with violence. Now, this is the first time that we have seen this kind of flare-up in violence since that MOU was signed. And it's really pointing to a number of issues with the MOU and how both sides see it. The US considers the Strait of Hormuz should be completely open. And certainly we're seeing from the Iranian side, we've heard from the Revolutionary Guard that they want any vessels transiting to go through the Iranian route. So to continue to ask permission, to fill out forms, whereas unsurprisingly, the majority of these vessels are choosing to hug the Omani coast on the southern part of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the UK Maritime Agency has said that they believe that the security threat in the Strait at this point is substantial. So we will have to see how many vessels actually choose to try and traverse traverse the Strait of Hormuz. Now, one bit of good news we have heard, there has been a trilateral agreement signed. This is between Israel, the US and Lebanon. This was mediated by the US in Washington. And we know that Israel has said that they will withdraw from 2 areas in southern Lebanon. And they are also, they have said, going to be withdrawing some of their troops. The US Secretary of State says it's just the beginning and knows there is a long way to go.
We still have a fight. They have some capability, not much. They're not winning or anything, but they have some capability. They can still shoot.
Meanwhile, diplomats say Israel and Lebanon have just made the first step towards a potential future peace deal. They signed an agreement with the U.S. on Friday after 4 days of talks in Washington. Secretary of State Marco Rubio calls the agreement, quote, the beginning of the beginning, describing it as a step towards a broader peace. Under the document, Israel will pull force out of 2 areas in southern Lebanon and hand the sites to the Lebanese military. But a Hezbollah member of Lebanon's parliament called on the government to retract anything that's been agreed to with Israel. Hezbollah, the Iran proxy group whose militants are fighting Israeli troops in Lebanon, not part of the agreement. In the last hour, I asked CNN national security analyst Alex Pleitsis if Hezbollah could bring down that agreement.
It was almost as a sub-agreement between Lebanon and Israel in terms of a ceasefire between the 2 of them and how this was going to work out. So it's from what I've been told by U.S. officials I've been talking to, there are a couple of phases that'll be agreed to in terms of geographic territory where Israel will withdraw and will hand the territory over to the Lebanese armed forces. But in return, the Lebanese armed forces will attempt to begin to disarm Hezbollah in those specific areas as part of a pilot program. And if that continues, then they'll try that through the rest of southern Lebanon. That's been unsuccessful for almost 40 years, which is why this is historic. So the next week or so, I think, is going to be a pretty amazing opportunity to work towards peace, or it's quite frankly going to be an opportunity for Iran to sow discord in this area and potentially disrupt the agreement. And that's the problem, because we have the IRGC in Iran, which has been at odds with the civilian government. So we'll find out whether or not they've been operating at odds with each other or whether or not they're actually in cahoots.
This Iran war in the context of gas prices, which is the way that so many people here who are struggling to make ends meet have seen this war. They've seen their gas prices go up. We've seen gas prices fall a bit in the last few weeks as the conflict has lessened a little bit. How do you sort of see what this war has taught us about energy?
Well, on the energy side, I can tell you this. There's no American that's happy with gas prices today. And as a farmer, there's no farmer in America that's happy with diesel prices. That's just the way it is, Alex. So let's look, this Iran war has been something that from the get-go we were told, and President Trump was very clear, the reason was to make sure that Iran would never, ever have a nuclear weapon and to come up with an agreement, Alex. But I can tell you this, I personally feel like Iran doesn't want an agreement. And what do I say that? Because that keeps the mullahs in power, the Ayatollah in power. I feel like the Castros never wanted us to have a relationship with them. But at the end of the day, this has been a hardship for farmers. It's been a hardship for the American people. And that's why President Trump is trying to finish this and close it off as quick as he can.
So does it sound like what you're saying is that the war wasn't worth it?
I mean, at the end of the day, I think Iran, for us, I'll just be very blunt with you. Iran is a long way from the USA.
Pull back some of President Trump's war powers. Even some Republicans voted against President Trump. Then Bill Cassidy, senator from Louisiana, changed his vote after getting a briefing at the White House yesterday. Now those strings no longer apply anymore. Bill Cassidy talked about why he changed his mind in an interview with Margaret Brennan from CBS. Watch. So you're talking to lots of people on the record, off the record, behind the scenes at the highest levels. What's some of the information that he's talking about? What are we talking about here?
So I actually found his statements to be reinforcing from what I heard actually from regional mediators who told me very similar things, and that there's behind the scenes agreements, even if they're not signed in the implementation side between the U.S. and Iran from civilian officials in terms of what they'll agree to, but only if the U.S. is going to meet them halfway. But if things leak out in the interim in terms of what they've agreed to without the U.S. also providing concessions, that they're worried about domestic political considerations. And so for that reason, they've been holding back, and also their public public statements haven't matched what's been going on in private. And so I was told actually earlier today by regional mediators that it's gotten to the point where they've told the Iranian civilian government officials, we can no longer accept the gap between what you're saying and what the IRGC is saying, and you need to come back and explain the difference or get it together on the same page. And I've been told that the response has been, we'll get back to you, and so far there hasn't been one. But at that point, between the U.S. and GCC officials, they're now on the same page. It's quite clear that they're not going to tolerate the gap at this point. So we'll see where it goes in the next week or so.
Signs of de-escalation in the Middle East after days of back-and-forth strikes between the United States and Iran, testing the clearly fragile ceasefire. A U.S. official telling CNN tonight that both sides have agreed to stand down. Now, at the heart of this escalation is the Strait of Hormuz. Iran trying to exert control over the critical shipping passage and attacks on 2 ships in recent days, which prompted renewed threats by President Trump. And while this was happening, the clock still ticking on that 60-day window under the agreement